the hush before history writes its name, the game of basketball rests beneath soft arena lights. The ball sits serenely on polished hardwood, its echo silent for now. There are no crowds, no broadcasters, no thunderous slam of sneakers. Just possibility, quiet and waiting. This is where revolutions begin, not in the roar, but in the whisper. Not in the muscle, but in the motion. And so it began with a boy, not known for his height or his strength, but for a different kind of gaze, sharp, thoughtful, impossibly optimistic. The boy was small for his age, lean and narrow-shouldered. His jersey hung like a borrowed shirt, but the way he moved was different, fluid, patient, like he heard a rhythm no one else could. He didn't explode across the court. He danced with it, pausing, shifting, seeing seams before there were seams. He was born Wardell Stephen Curry too, but one day the world would simply call him Steph. The gym speaks softly early in the morning. The sound of rubber soles scraping the wood, the rustle of a net catching a perfect shot. These are the sounds that filled his mornings and his evenings. Long before the public knew his name, he would shoot from deep, far past where other young players dared. The ball arcing like a moonrise, falling with a whisper. There is a moment, years ahead in 2015, when he stands quietly in a dark suit, his frame still tapered, unassuming. The Larry O'Brien trophy is nowhere in sight, not yet. The lights are bright, but he isn't. He doesn't glow in the usual way champions glow. But when his name is called most valuable player, he merely lowers his head in gratitude. Number shout, no soaring leap, just a soft smile. It's the same smile he wore after playground games in elementary school. Somewhere, a kid in Maryland saw that and began shifting his range further out. Somewhere else, a coach rethought his team's offensive spacing, but none of that is visible in the moment. In that moment, all you see is a man who refuses to outshine the game and changes everything because of it. This is the quiet revolution of Steph Curry. But to understand this revolution, one must begin not with banners or trophies, but with a door half closed in a suburban home in Charlotte, North Carolina. In that household, there were rhythms, not unlike those of the game itself. His father, Dell, was often gone on road trips, wearing team colors and chasing wins in the NBA. But when he returned, he brought with him the scent of sweat and stadium popcorn, the glow of half-empty bus rides, and stories from locker rooms that lingered late into Steph's memory. On certain evenings, Dell would return from the gym with Steph, into baby-faced and biggered after a shoot-around on the Hornets practice floor. Sometimes it wasn't practice at all, but an offer-in an empty arena. No one else around, just father and son, shooting silently under the overhead lights. The echo of each made shot filled the building like a secret sealed in joy. But it wasn't Dell who drew up plays for his boy. It wasn't fame that built Steph. It was Sonia, his mother, who set the tone. A former volleyball star and a woman of sharp grit and grace, she woke her boys early, held them accountable, made sure they fired off homework assignments and morning runs with equal resolve. In that house, success wasn't television highlights, it was discipline. There were expectations, and warmth followed obedience. But Waver and her stare could pin you still. And then there was Seth, younger by just 2 years. The two brothers often shared late-night shooting contests in the driveway, using imaginary defenders, counting each make until the darkness swallowed the rim. Seth too knew the rhythm, the balance, the mechanics. Steph could never simply co-stand. That challenged him, quietly, without cruelty. Shooting never came easily to Steph, at least. Not the way many remember. His form was flawed for years. He shot with both hands, slinging the ball with his chest. His range was aspirational, never practical, not yet. People laughed when he pulled up from beyond 30 feet. The shots clanged off the rim or thudded harmlessly against the backboard. He'd walk back, reset, exhale, and try again. Those who watched him closely talk about the hours, not the highlights. They remember a boy who changed nothing about his routine, even when the motions failed him. Who would miss 5, 6, sometimes 7 three-pointers in a row from that same unnatural distance, but never stop retaking that same shot. Always searching for feel, always listening for the net's whisper. He's too small, he's too fragile, he's a coach's son, not a superstar. The world likes its molds. It treasures predictability. But Steph never fit. He grew. Up in a house where the television was always on the game and sneakers clattered at the front door like wind chimes. But for all the geometry and sound of his youth, no one saw revolution forming in his wrists. Until one day, a man named Bob at Davidson College heard something in Steph's game that no other Division I coach seemed to hear. But that comes later. For now, the gym is quiet again. The boy wipes sweat from his forehead. There's no crowd, no music. Just one more shot. It leaves his fingertips softly like a question, waiting for an answer. And as it falls through the net, without a sound, perhaps the future stirs. Perhaps history begins, not with noise, but with a hush. The hush of a revolution that shoots from 30 feet out, lands without thunder and changes everything, with grace, with rhythm, and with silence. In a quiet Charlotte neighborhood, nestled between tunnels of trees and the laughter of children riding bikes down cul-de-sacs, lived the Curry family. There was no golden gate marking their door, no red carpet rolled out for future greatness. Just a house filled with love, early mornings, and the steady thump of a basketball hitting the driveway. Inside the home, the rhythms were unmistakable. The bounce of ball on concrete, the whistle of a mother calling her children in for dinner, the hum of televised games projecting distant arenas into the living room. The television didn't dominate, contributed. Games were watched, plays were discussed. Silence fell during fourth quarters, and reactions were measured. There was no yelling, only study. Basketball, in this home, wasn't a spectacle, it was a language. Steph was the firstborn, arriving on a March day in 1988 beneath the towering shadow of his father's rising NBA career. DellCurry.com, in demeanor and deadly behind the arc, was carving out his own name among the league's sharpshooters. But at home, he was just dad. His voice never boomed, but it carried weight, quiet encouragement, honest feedback, and above all consistency, he was as faithful to his craft as he was to his sons. Many remember the games Dell played with the Charlotte Hornets. Few recall the silver station wagon rides after practice, where Dell would scoop up his boys and take them to the gym. Steph, barely tall enough to see over the scorer's table, would trail behind his father with a miniature ball wedged beneath his arm. He'd sit quietly on the bench as pros ran drills, eyes wide, taking mental notes. Sometimes, if the court emptied early, Dell would motion him in. Those were their moments, as sacred and serene as chapel light through stained glass. Father teaching without lecturing, son listening without being told. The ball would move between them, a quiet conversation in motion, bounce passes, high arcs, corner shots. It wasn't about winning, it was about rhythm, about listening to the game instead of controlling it. But it wasn't Dell who set the day-to-day tempo for Steph's life. Sonia Curry, his mother, was both lighthouse and metronome. She rose early and expected her children to do the same. A former athlete herself, competitive and principled, she believed in effort above all else. There were rules: school first, God always, and respect without exception. When discipline was needed, her stare was enough. When encouragement was due, she offered it as clearly as a buzzer at the end of a quarter. She was never swept away by the NBA spotlight. She grounded her children not with punishment, but presence. She demanded their best, and they offered it not out of fear, but a quiet longing to meet her high bar. Steph shared the house with his younger brother, Seth, close in age and closer. Still in spirit, the boys were each other's most loyal rivals. Afternoons faded into evenings as they played one-on-one beneath the Carolina sky. Voices hushed, shoes skidding on dusty driveways. They didn't need imaginary friends, they had each other and the scoreboard in their minds, because the driveway was more than slanted pavement. It was an arena. Each possession carried weight. Whether they imagined themselves as Penny Hardaway, Tim Hardaway, or Dell himself, the twins in competition kept score by feel, not numbers. And almost always, the games ended not in argument, but mutual respect. And then, after final baskets, they'd return inside shirts, soaked faces, laughing, hearts full, just boys. The game came naturally to Seth, more naturally than many knew, but Steph, he had to work for it. His shooting form was unorthodox, tangled in effort. He flung the ball from his chest, arms not long enough yet to isolate his wrists. His shots soared like high-wished prayers. They often missed, but he never stopped taking them, night after night. Before homework or after dinner, he'd go back out. Alone, the street lamps would blink to life, and shadows would stretch across the driveway. The net swayed against the soft whispers of wind, and Steph would step to his mark, plant his feet, and launch the ball skyward. Sometimes it hit, sometimes it didn't, but each attempt was its own soft vow. Tomorrow, I'll get closer. There are stories his family tells, not of instant success, but of drawn-out afternoons filled with of neighbors peeking out from curtained windows, hearing the same missed shot over and over again, and of Steph, cheeks flushed, arms sore, refusing to move inside until he made 10 in a row from a distance no kid his age should be shooting. But he was never reckless with ambition. It wasn't fire, it was something gentler, steady pull toward something he couldn't yet name. He didn't want to defy the odds. He just believed they weren't finished being written at school. He was quiet, polite. Teachers remembered. A boy who rarely spoke unless asked, but who locked into lessons with the same focus he gave to basketball drills. Coaches liked him, but few looked at him and saw greatness. He was small, wiry, too ordinary looking to project into something extraordinary. High school brought progress, but also limitations. Charlotte Christian School competed, but not at the national level. And Steph, he succeeded, but didn't dominate the way top recruits typically do. He was a standout locally, but invisible nationally. When the time came to talk about colleges, Dell reached out gently to his alma mater, Virginia Tech. He asked whether they'd look at his son. What he heard back was both polite and heartbreaking. He's not quite big enough, not quick enough. We could consider him as a walk-on for Dell Curry's son. The silence after that call may have lasted only seconds, but it stretched inside their home like an empty court echoing after a miss. They all felt it, but once again, Steph didn't rage. He just returned to work and then a call. Not from a basketball powerhouse. Not from Duke. Not from North Carolina. And not from Maryland. Just Davidson College, a small liberal arts school tucked between trees and train tracks. Their head coach, Bob McKillop, had seen Steph play, and unlike others, he hadn't counted his inches. He'd measured his heartbeat, saw what he called a quiet fire, the kind that doesn't flicker even when unnoticed. The offer that followed wasn't glamorous, but it was sincere, and it was not dismissed. In fact, it may have been exactly what Steph needed. A coach who would give him the ball. A program that would let him grow. Raspy gyms, fewer cameras, more space for failure and for brilliance. And so, Steph Curry accepted, not knowing that what he had just chosen was not merely a college. It was a launch pad for whispers to become echoes, and echoes eventually become the noise that changes everything. When Steph arrived at Davidson College, the buildings didn't glimmer with marble columns or championship banners. The campus was quiet, shaded by maples and sweet gum trees. Where others might have seen limits, Steph saw room. Room to breathe. Room to stumble. Room to grow. Bob McKillop had watched the boy play and didn't flinch when others asked, "Really?" Him to McKillop, Steph's potential wasn't written in wingspan or vertical leap. It was coded into the pauses between dribbles, the bursts of command between missed shots, the smile he wore even when he was behind. But potential has its own timeline, and Steph's first college season began not with triumph but trial. The opening months saw turnovers mount like clutter, passes too ambitious, mistakes made not from fear but eagerness, games played with feverish energy and a heart too full. He was trying, the coaches would later say, to do everything at once. Because he'd waited so long for this chance, he didn't want to waste a second. One night, after a loss that weighed heavier than the scoreboard suggested, Steph sat alone in his dorm room. The voices of doubt weren't loud, but they were there. Am I good enough? Was everyone else right? He didn't sob. Instead, he sat, breathed deeply, and stared at his own reflection in the soft blue of the window glass. Then, the next morning, as if those questions never whispered, he returned to the gym. Somewhere between turnover 18 and 19, between missed threes and tightened defenses, something clicked. Not all at once, not like lightning, but slowly, a little less hesitation in the pull-up, a little more patience in the pocket. He began to let the game come to him quietly, like it always wanted to. And then, the ball started landing in the net more often than not. By mid-season, the conversation around campus began to shift. Students who once passed by the gym without notice now lingered. One game turned heads, then another turned crowds. Soon, unlikely believers emerged, drawn not by spectacle, but by something steadier, something sincere. Steph's freshman year ended with flashes of brilliance, but it was his sophomore season that called the Tint Nation to attention. March arrived like a whisper and turned into an anthem. The 2008 NCAA tournament had no plans for Davidson College. The selection committee had barely lifted an eyebrow, but underdog stories rarely send invitations, they arrive unannounced. And Davidson, against every projection, found itself standing opposite Gonzaga in the first round. Gonzaga walked in with stature. Steph walked in with something else. Confidence, shaped not from headlines, but from driveways, from do-overs and sore arms, from being counted out and still stepping in. The game began, and early on, Davidson trailed. Steph missed shots, rushed a few, but he kept shooting. Then it happened. A stretch of minutes where the ball didn't just go in, it floated, hummed, glided into the net like it belonged. The defenders grew tighter, the court more urgent, but Steph remained still inside. The kind of stillness that doesn't pause but permeates. He scored 30. Davidson won, and suddenly the camera lenses refocused. Not with fanfare, but with curiosity. The second-round opponent was Georgetown, a storied program with big shadows and bigger players. Pundits said the clock would strike midnight for Davidson. A nice little tale, they said, but no match for Georgetown's muscle. What they didn't factor in was memory. Steph remembered the doubts. He remembered the missed walk-in call. He remembered the nights on the driveway when no one was keeping score but him. He dropped 30 again, and just like that, Davidson, the tiny school with the waist-high banners, was in the Sweet 16. Wisconsin came next. And even there, in there, scripted defense and hardened pace, Steph's rhythm found a gap. He wove between picks like sunlight through blinds. He moved when you thought he might stop, and pulled up when you thought he'd pass. Another victory, another 30. Davidson was now in the Elite Eight. Against them, the University of Kansas. This, finally, would be the halt to the hymn. Kansas, heavy with talent and pedigree, wasn't fooled by fairy tales. They tightened their defense on Steph like stitched seams. His every look was challenged, every curl was nudged, and still he found space, not always to shoot but to lead, to draw people in, then feed the pass. The rhythm had evolved. The final minutes were tense. Davidson had the ball, down by 2. Steph moved into position. The breath of everyone watching hung still, suspended in anticipation. But the final shot went to a teammate. It missed. Davidson had come within one basket of the final, for as Kansas exhaled in victory, Steph stood lightly on the court. No grimace, no flinch, just a steady, knowing nod, almost like he'd left something unfinished in the air. And in a way he had, because what the tournament didn't crown, it revealed. Steph Curry was no longer the son of someone famous. He wasn't just that undersized guard from Davidson. He was a vision of what basketball could feel like when played with freedom and stillness, with joy and geometry. Children across the country saw the way he moved, and somewhere deep in their quiet hearts, they believed they could move like that too. There were bigger players, there were flashier names, but no one else played like a whisper. No one else changed the expectation of what a star could look like, how far out he could shoot, how softly he could celebrate, how deeply he could believe. When the lights on that final game in 2008 dimmed, Steph didn't collapse or cry. He walked back down the tunnel with his head, even like someone who didn't think a door had closed, but rather one had just been found. He had gone farther than anyone predicted, but more importantly, he had gone deep enough to disturb the dust. That season, the world took notice. The league, it would soon follow, but not before Steph returned to the gym. Always the gym. The draft came without a parade. No fireworks, no dramatic music. Just names read aloud in order, over a sea of suits and hopeful stares. When the Golden State Warriors selected Stephen Curry with the 7th pick in the 2009 NBA draft, some clapped. Some wondered. More than a few raised eyebrows. He smiled politely. The moment felt big but quiet, as if the sport itself was unsure of what it had just received. The questions hummed in the background. Too small, too thin, injury-prone ankles. No defensive presence. A system scorer from a mid-major college. Some pundits asked if he was a better fit for a European league. Others questioned whether he could even survive the NBA's pace, let alone thrive in it. But Steph had heard this before. It didn't sting in the way doubt used to. It simply folded itself into his rhythm. His first season with the Warriors was one of learning, adapting, not conquering. He arrived in Oakland to a franchise in flux, a roster in search of identity, and a basketball culture that swung between chaos and rebirth. The Warriors were not the team they would soon become. They were, at best, a blueprint drawn in pencil. The first practices were eye-opening. The NBA game had weight-heavier shoulders, sharper elbows, more ruthless speed. Defenses read you before you could think. Offenses required choreography. The movements of college had to be unlearned, simplified into faster, purer motion. Steph, like so many rookies, stumbled. But he didn't sulk. He spent hours watching tape, not just of his own games, but of past shooters. Reggie, Raydell. He studied footwork more than releases, spacing more than shooting. He wanted to know how quick decisions became second nature, how the game slowed down when everything else sped up. Still, the league noticed his wrists. Every so often, he'd pull up from an unwise distance and hit. The crowd would lift its head. Not a roar, just a breath. Like the air had changed shape, but the problems came too. Not long into his career, his right ankle failed him. Then, again and again. Ligaments weakened, bones stressed. One procedure followed another, then another. There were games he couldn't finish, games he couldn't start. The whispers returned, heavier than ever. Glass ankles, unreliable, promising, but fragile. He missed most of the 2011 to 2012 season. The team struggled. The headlines softened until his name was barely written. In arenas across the country, he was no longer the story. He was a cautionary prelude. But even in the silence of rehabilitation gyms, he found rhythm. Hours with trainers, relearning how to land, reworking balance, not just healing but re-engineering. He didn't grow bitter, he grew careful. He found confidence in form, not force. And then something shifted. Not with a boom, but a balance. Around. This time, the Warriors signed him to what some called a modest 4-year deal. A small market discount, the analysts said. A bargain. But Steph knew otherwise. Security, space, time. All the things he needed to unfold. Properly. Because quiet progress doesn't sell tickets, but it builds THRONES. In 2012, newcomers emerge, dames like Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, a core-forming knot of superstars, but craftsmen. Warriors coach Mark Jackson made a soft declaration: the best shooting backcourt in NBA history. It sounded like theater, but somewhere beneath the surface, a revolution tapped its tempo. The next season, flashes turned frequent. Steph dropped 54 points at Madison Square Garden. One night training threes over defenders like a pianist coaxing melody from hardwood. The shots fell not with violence, but precision. And still he celebrated gently. He did not shout. He did not pound his chest. He simply turned, nodded, and returned to the next possession as if chasing something still unfinished. His pull-up jumpers stretched the floor. He started taking and making shots, from ranges few dared. Not corner threes, not even top of the key, but several steps back behind the bold lines designers had drawn to curb ambition. The arc of his jumper grew higher, his release quicker. Not out of defiance, but comfort. Other players tried to, they missed, he didn't. Points stacked, wins appeared more often. The Warriors became less of a curiosity and more of a problem. Playoff series arrived, lose, advance. The rhythm of progression. Still, the championship window didn't feel open yet. But somewhere amid the near misses and May exits, patterns formed. Steph as the fulcrum, movement over isolation, motion over muscle. It was not dominance, it was influence. And then the final piece snapped into place, soft as snow on a roof. Steve Kerr arrived in 2014 as the new head coach. He brought with him something Steph recognized. Just systems, but permission. Shoot, move, pass again, trust the flow. Like jazz practiced hard enough to sound like improv. Kerr freed the spacing. He opened corners. He gave Steph the full court the way a canvas is given the whole brush. And Steph always a listener. Always a learner responded, not with noise, but with grace. The numbers rose. The trust deepened. The league, long a cathedral of centers and slashing wings, began to turn its attention to the arc. Not the painted key beneath the basket, but the distant curl beyond the three-point line. Still, Steph didn't crow. He spent time in shoot-arounds, long after teammates left, taking shots at absurd angles, not for show, but for familiarity. He moved as if chasing new questions, not showing off answers. When the 2014 to 2015 season commenced, no one foresaw a storm, but a storm came. Not of thunder, of footing, of flight, of silence finding its form. When the 2014 season gave way to its winter rhythms, something subtle began unfolding in the Bay Area. It wasn't marked by fireworks or declarations, it was felt. More than announced. The Warriors had a new architect. Steve Kerr, a former player of championship pedigree, but a coach of untested vision. He came not to rebuild, but to refine. And to Steph, his voice sounded familiar not in tone, but in trust. Because what Kerr offered, few coaches dared. Freedom, trust in movement. Permission to break the mold, not with rebellion, but with rhythm. The offense Kerr installed wasn't bound by positions. It was a dance of reads, cuts, and unspoken cues. Steph, long shaped by structure, now thrived in improvisation. The floor unraveled and revealed a stage. That season, the court felt wider. Opponents still crowded him beyond screens, doubled him at the arc, but now the ball found its way back. The spacing breathed. Shooters stood ready. Steph no longer had to carry everything only to spark it. Klay Thompson, quick with the wrist and quiet with the ego, formed the other half of what the world came to call the Splash Brothers. Together, they weren't just teammates, they were echo and answer. Klay's stoic fire, Steph's gentle joy, multiple 30-point nights, often between them, and not a chest thump in sight. The passes became poetry. Draymond Green added a new voice to the rhythm, gritty, defiant, unfiltered. But he saw Steph for what he was, a controlling heart with silent pulses. Their chemistry was frictionless. Steph absorbed chaos and released calm. The team followed suit, and then came the winning. The Warriors strung together victories like knots on a rosary, 1, 2, 10, 30, 50. Each one humbling, each one earned. People began noticing, but from the outside, It merely looked like beautiful basketball. Inside, it was a belief system. The belief that smarter could beat louder, that grace could beat force. By spring of 2015, the numbers couldn't be ignored. Steph led the league in three-pointers again, but he also led it in something harder to measure: joy. He played like someone who truly loved the game, not fame, not the spectacle, but its soul. When the MVP voting came and his name was called Stephen Curry, Most Valuable Player, the announcement didn't split the sky. Steph merely nodded, rose to his feet, and walked up to the podium like someone accepting a quiet responsibility. He thanked his teammates, his family, his faith. He did not speak about himself. He didn't need to. And then, the playoffs, where the league's pace stiffens and the rim narrows under pressure. Steph, unshaken, brought his soft touch into the storm. The Pelicans, then the Grizzlies. Defensive traps, flying bodies, and yet step-back threes from the parking lot. Floaters kissed softly off the glass. Pump fakes that sent giants leaping into silence. The deeper the run, the more precise he became. Not perfect, never that, but purer. In the conference finals, up against the Rockets, he met another MVP-caliber guard in James Harden. People framed it as a duel. Steph never bought into that. His answer to pressure wasn't fire, it was flow. And so, the Warriors flowed. All the way to the finals. Waiting for them, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And with them, a Titan LeBron James. Injuries had stripped Cleveland of stars. But LeBron stood sturdy, ready to carry the weight of a city. The finals weren't gentle. They were tight, bruising. Even graceful battles need friction to be true. The first couple of games tilted and swayed. Steph was not that he never missed. It was that his soul never wavered. Even in cold stretches, he returned to his shot, not with desperation, but with certainty. By Game 5, he was uncoiled, scoring 37, slaloming through defenders like wind through reeds. His threes soared, impossibly high, impossibly fast. Each one not shouted into being, but invited. And in Game 6, it happened. The buzzer, the confetti, the swell of teammates rushing the court. The Golden State Warriors champions for the first time in 40 years. No thunder, only awe. Steph held the trophy like he might a child. Not as a prize won, but a promise kept. He didn't raise it high. He simply held it close. After the game, reporters asked again and again, how had he done it? How had this mild-mannered guard become the face of a champion? He looked down, smiled, and offered almost nothing, just a grateful gaze and a nod. That year, basketball had shifted. Where once it bowed to bruises, now it leaned toward grace. Where once it admired rim-rattling force, now it paused for the arc. And in the center of that arc, balanced perfectly on the edge of effort and ease, Steph, still small, still unassuming, entirely unstoppable. The 2015 to 2016 season arrived not with expectations, but with questions. Could Steph and the Warriors repeat the beauty they had composed the year before? Could lightning strike twice, not in chaos, but in choreography? And so began a season unlike any before it. From the opening tip, the Warriors played like a current beneath the surface, swift, steady, undeniable. Wins came one after another, as if linked by invisible thread. Early in the season, they started 24-0, the best start in NBA history. Steph dashed lighter than gravity. Sharper than time, was not just playing basketball, he was altering it. His three-pointers now came from dimensions previously unexplored. For feet behind the line, nod-rebel pull-ups, fadeaways, gliding sideways. Defenders were there always. It didn't matter. He moved differently. Not faster, just more fully, like he existed between the spaces where others waited. The game slowed for him, even as the rest ran to catch up. They chased 70 wins, then 72. With each passing night, the noise surrounding them grew, the disbelief, the metrics, the media swells. But inside the locker room, there was softness. Not complacency, but continuity. They weren't chasing immortality. They were just playing beautifully. Then -7-3. A record shattered. The most wins in NBA history. A team that had once been a whisper, now etched its name in stone. Every mark topped. Every eye turned. And still it wasn't loud. Even when Steph, for the second straight year, was named the league's most valuable player. This time, unanimously, it felt like recognition, as much as realization. Not a coronation, but a conclusion. He gave his acceptance speech calmly, thanked the usual, family, teammates, coaches, and then softly added, "Be the best version of yourself in everything you do." As if to remind everyone greatness is not about dominion, but devotion. Then came the playoffs. The first round started like so many others, routine, rhythmic. But in Game 1 against the Houston Rockets, Steph slipped. A mild ankle sprain, they said. Nothing serious. He sat Game 2, returned briefly in Game 4. But the court no longer held him as gently. This time, he slipped again worse. A Grade 1 MCL. Sprained. Our silence fell. The Warriors surged without him, Drummond and Clay shouldering more. But the worry lingered. Would Steph return? And if he did, would he be Steph? He returned in Game 4 of the second round against the Blazers. Rusty at first. Unsure. The arena buzzed not with cheers, but with hope, and then overtime. Steph scored 17 points in 5 minutes. A record, each shot carving away the doubt. He ended the night with 40 and one gentle sentence to the all-watchful world: "I'm back." But endurance is funny. It doesn't always run in straight lines. The Warriors made it past Portland, past Oklahoma City, barely down 3-1 in the conference finals. They rallied. Clay dropped 41 in Game 6, the infamous Game 6, Clay. But it was Steph who closed the door, steadying the ship in Game 7. Cleveland awaited them in the finals. A rematch. LeBron, Kyrie. The weight of last year. The promise of this year. History teetered. The Warriors took the first 2 games handily. Then Game 3 they stumbled. Game 4 another win, up 3-1, and then the fall. Game 5 shifted when Draymond was suspended. Irving and LeBron unshackled, each scored 41. Game 6, more of the same. Steph fouled out for the first time in years. Through his mouthguard, something cracked, not just strategy, but symmetry. Game 7, there is a particular kind of silence that descends before a final contest. The entire season, every make, every step, every whisper, coiled into this one evening. In Oracle Arena, the tension hummed. Steph did not force. He did not flinch. But something was missing. Not effort, not desire, but echo. The Cavaliers would not relent. LeBron chased down shots like a ghost at full sprint. Kyrie, with 53 seconds left, hit the shot. A 3. Pure. Final. Steph tried to answer. He pulled. Up. Released. Missed. And with that, the silence returned. Cleveland's first championship in decades. LeBron wept. The city roared. And Steph, he walked off the floor with head held level, not broken just remembering. That season had brought poetry. 402 made threes, 73 wins, unanimous MVP, and still loss. It hurt, it didn't glow, but sometimes greatness isn't in the fireworks, it's in what follows them. Steph didn't blame, he didn't unravel. He watched confetti fall for another team and quietly, humbly, went back to work because records fade. Rings shine, but only for so long. But rhythm, true rhythm, how you lead, how you lose, how you try again, that lasts, even without a banner, especially without a banner. When Kevin Durant chose to join the Golden State Warriors in the summer of 2016, the world shifted its gaze. The questions flew quickly. Was this still Steph's team? Had he traded humility for dominance? Would the soul of what the Warriors had built bend beneath the weight of expectations? Steph never answered with words. He didn't have to, because in his form of leadership, sharing was never surrender. The arrival of Durant wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. To evolve, to stretch, to chase a version of greatness no longer confined to proof, but process. He stepped back, not out. He never stopped shooting, he just did so with less need for applause. His touches dipped, his scoring average nudged downward. But the wins, they multiplied. The 2016-2017 Warriors were a machine of motion, vertical and horizontal, anchored by fluency. When Durant needed space, Steph cleared the lane. When the offense needed air, Steph provided rhythm. His gravity as a shooter twisted defenses into uncomfortable shapes, freeing his teammates not with speech, but silence. They stormed through the regular season again, but this time quieter, less debate, less awe, just inevitability. In the playoffs, the Warriors lost only one game, a postseason run so dominant, it looked almost unfair. But to Steph, dominance had never been the goal. Execution was, purpose was. Their finals opponent, once again. Cleveland Steph, healthy and focused, played without burden. He didn't outscore LeBron or Kyrie in every game. He didn't need to, but his presence pulsed beneath every possession. The team fed off his serenity. He averaged over 26 points, nearly 9 assists, and just smiled quietly through the champagne. Durant was named Finals MVP, and Steph clapped the loudest. For some, it stirred unease. How could the face of a founding Ika stand so willingly in another man's spotlight? Because he was never chasing shadow. Because true greatness invites the light to fall everywhere. The next season brought more of the same. Another deep run, another finals, another championship, this time in a sweep. Durant, MVP again. Steph, steady again. But then, change. In 2019, the texture of the journey shifted. Injury found them all. First KD, then Clay. The smooth rhythm lost its tempo. The finals against Toronto showed a team flickering, not falling apart, but weathering death by inches. Then came the night when Steph reached high for a layup, and landed hard. His hand broke. The arena held its breath. The 2019-2020 season became a different kind of test. The Warriors sank to the bottom of the standings. Steph missed most of the year. When he returned, the team had few of the names from its dominant run. The dynasty, some said, was over, but quiet has always suited him. In empty gyms and lightless locker rooms, Steph kept working. His faith didn't fade. His rhythm didn't falter. In 2020 to 2021, with Clay still out and the roster thin, Steph nearly won another scoring title. Night after night, he delivered 30, 40, 50-point outbursts, not as glory grabs, but as survival. He reminded the world, politely, that the arc still belonged to him. And then, 2022, the world had stopped and restarted. Basketball had drifted, regrouped, but something ancient stirred in the Warriors. Clay returned. Andrew Wiggins found purpose. Jordan Poole came of age. And Draymond found his snarling, brilliant center again. And Steph, he shaped their chaos in two. Song, through the season, he led not just in shots, but in presence. The team wove itself around his steadiness. Every screen, every switch, every spacing cue turned on where Steph stood. The playoffs, once again, loomed. Denver, Memphis, Dallas. Each series brought bruises and questions. Doubt, again, circled. But Steph danced through it, not untouched, but unwavering. And then, the finals, against Boston's towering defense. Steph was hounded, challenged, hit. Still, he floated. His footwork became poetry. His passes, windows, into intention. In Game 4, with the Warriors down 2-1 in the series, he delivered one of the greatest performances of his career. 43 points, every one necessary. No histrionics, no theatrics, just the calm unfolding of brilliance. Golden State took games 5 and 6. In the closing moments of that final win, Steph wept openly for the first time in memory, because this one was different. Without Durant, with doubts, with years of silence and surgery and games that didn't matter on paper. This one was for belief. He was named Finals MVP at last, not because he chased it, but because he had earned it, and never once let us see him sweat. And now, the records. All-time leader in three-pointers made, overtaking legends not with a shout, but a flick of the wrist. Multiple MVPs for championships. Countless hearts moved. Still, in all of it he stayed light. He still smiles after every make, still lifts teammates off the ground faster than he, celebrates himself, still shoots from spaces most players only dare in dreams, because his gift is not distance. His gift is elegance. His gift is permanence. It's not in volume or verdicts, but in the geometry of possibility. There's an old rhythm still alive in the game. It doesn't always show up on highlight reels or fill arenas with thunder. Instead, it slips in quietly, like early morning light on the edge of a court the moment before a ball hits hardwood. The breath taken before release. In places far from where the lights reach brightest. In modest gyms of suburban neighborhoods or cracked asphalt parks, you can hear it. That same quiet sound, ball bounced deliberately, a shot lifted from just past half court, not out of rebellion, but out of remembrance. And somewhere in the solitude of his familiar gym, Steph Curry takes another shot. He's no longer the boy with sloped shoulders and a borrowed jersey. He's no longer the prospect doubted, nor just the MVP or the champion. He is, instead, something quieter, something more enduring. He has become a shape in the language of basketball, a curve on a graph no longer centered in the paint, a philosophy born not of power, but of precision. He doesn't need to introduce himself. His name lives in arc lines, drawn by kids who were once told not to shoot from that far, in the training regimens of youth coaches now teaching balance over brute force, in the geometry of teams remade around movement, around space, around shooting, not in proximity, but in purity. He has turned a three-pointer from a specialty into a signature. from a risk into a rhythm. And the influence has echoed quietly but fired in countries across oceans. Children who have never been to California wear his number. They don't want to dunk like stars of the past. They want to pull up from 30 feet and let the silence speak for them. This was never by accident. Steph played the same way in pre-game warm-ups as he did in finals games, not rehearsing showmanship, but rehearsing clarity. He never added weight to be heavier. He never changed his core to appease an era. He simply waited until the era caught up. Now, teams reshape their rosters, trying to find players in his image. Statisticians add new columns to track the effects of his proximity. No defender closes out the same way. No scouting report is complete without asking, what if he's open from 35? Yet, even as the world adjusted, he remained. Still the player who lowers his gaze in post-game interviews, who thanks the bench before himself, still laughs with teammates during shoot-arounds, balancing trick shots with routine laps, still arrives early, stays late, not because he needs to, but because he knows somewhere a kid is watching. And that kid believes that excellence can look like grace. What's most profound about his legacy is not what he won, but how he won. He did not intimidate, he did not overpower, he invited the game to breathe, and in doing so, showed millions that mastery doesn't require bravado, that dominance doesn't require volume, that silence, too, can be revolutionary. Now, when Steph checks into a game, the crowd doesn't just cheer, they hold their breath, because they know the next shot might change the shape of the noise. He has moved through the sport like a tide not crashing, but shifting everything beneath it. And still, with each possession, there's a sense that he's waiting curious, not for the accolades, but for the next perfect angle, the next unseen shot, the next whisper from the game asking, can this, too, be done? And he answers with a release, effortless, elevated, again and again. No flame lasts forever, but some fires leave behind warmth, a memory of heat, long after the light fades. What Steph Curry has done won't disappear. It lives in the data streams and trophy cases, but also, more importantly, in the quiet places, in a kid waking up at sunrise to shoot before dawn, in a coach rewriting their offense to make room for possibility, in the moment of stillness before a shot when the ball is lifted. There's no sound, and the world forgets even to breathe, until the net confirms. Yes, it's possible. And there, in that silence, the game remembers him, not just as a player, but as a revolution. The one who reimagined the game, not by turning up the volume, but by turning the court into something more spacious, more joyful, more forever.